Magnus Carlson is the current chess world champion and is widely considered to be one of, if not the best, chess player of all time. In fact, he's so good at chess that he's even won 125 games in a row without losing a single time. So what happens when a new contender steps up to the plate and gives Magnus Carlson a run for his money? Judith Polgar is a Hungarian chess grandmaster who is widely regarded as the best female chess player of all time. In 1991, at the age of 15 years and 4 months, Polgar became the youngest grandmaster in history, breaking the record previously held by former world champion Bobby Fischer. While people debate whether Garry Kasparov or Magnus Carlson is the greatest player of all time, Polgar is unquestionably the best woman to ever play the game. She's the only woman to have crossed the 2700 rating threshold that many consider as the Super GM distinction. And from the time she was 12, she was the top-ranked female player in the world for more than 26 years, all the way up to her retirement in 2014. So when she comes out of retirement for a showdown against the world chess champion Magnus Carlson, it becomes clear that he has underestimated his opponent. This is a 3-minute blitz match, so the stakes are extremely high. Judith starts the game out with pawn to e4, and Magnus responds with pawn to c5, hoping to contest the center 4 squares which are the strongest on the board. Polgar brings her knight out to f3, since this not only develops her pieces, but also will help protect her from Magnus's pawn, as you'll see in her next move. Magnus brings his kingside pawn forward to c6, and Judith brings her second pawn forward to d4. An extremely common move she's played many times, including against Carlson in 2014, where she ended up losing the game. However, this time she's got a secret plan to trap Magnus's pieces, which he'll never see coming. The two continue developing their pieces, and after Magnus brings his own knight out to c6, the game devolves into the extremely common but aggressive Taimanov variation of the Sicilian defense, signaling that this is going to turn into an explosive game. Magnus looks extremely relaxed at this point, thinking this is going to be an easy game, and brings his queen out to c7. Judith responds by moving her own queen forward to d2, getting ready to use it in a few moves. Magnus brings his knight forwards to f6, and Black responds by moving a pawn forwards to f3. Right now, both players are in an even position, with a slight advantage to White due to having a better control of the center squares and also a better pawn structure, as the pawns on e4, f3, and g2 are all working together to defend each other. Magnus activates his bishop, moving it to e7, and Polgar castles, leaving her king in an extremely protected position. Both players move a pawn forward, and then the first exchange of minor pieces happens on d4, with Magnus choosing to exchange knights. This trade slightly favors Magnus since the white knight was in a better position, but only by a small margin. Magnus moves his light-squared bishop forward to b7, looking to launch an attack on the middle of the board, threatening the pawn on e4 with 2 separate pieces. Polgar pushes a pawn forwards, threatening Magnus's knight and forcing him to take the pawn on g4, which will result in the world champion having an extremely weak knight, as you're about to see. White moves rook to g1, an extremely good move, pushing the knight back even further and putting it on the edge of the board. You may have heard the expression, "Knights on the rim are grim." This is because once a knight is pushed to the edge of the board, the moves it can make are extremely limited, and this knight sitting on h6 is basically out of the game. Magnus even acknowledges the move in between moves.
Yeah, it's a really bad knight.
Little did everyone know, this was the beginning of the end for the world champion. Polgar takes 2 moves to get her light-squared bishop into the center of the board, first moving it to d3 and then to e4, directly threatening Carlson's bishop while keeping her own defended by the pawn behind it. Magnus takes a second to think about his next move before delivering a lethal blow to himself. It's rare to see blunders at such a high level of play, especially between 2 of the top 10 players in the world. However, with such a low amount of time on the clock, it can be difficult to stay level-headed, even for the world champion. Magnus moves his rook to c8, and Judith responds by moving her dark-squared bishop to b6, a killer move. As the crowd watches on in bewilderment and excitement, it's obvious that only Magnus and Anish Giri, the ranked number 3 chess player in the world who is watching on in the crowd, realize how strong of a move this is. The game isn't over yet, but here's why the move is so strong. If Magnus takes the bishop with his queen, Polgar has mate in 1 by moving her queen up to d7. This forces Magnus to sacrifice his queen, but he chooses to play on, not knowing that the rank 1 women's player has another trick up her sleeve. Carlson trades with a bishop on e4, and his queen is taken by Polgar's bishop on c7. She moves her bishop over to d6, an extremely dangerous position as it's defended by the pawn pawn on e5. Magnus responds by moving his knight to f5, threatening to take. However, Polgar fortifies her position by moving a knight to e4. Unfortunately, being down a queen is too much, and Carlson resigns the match, shaking hands with Polgar, who comes out of the match on top.